Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa McClenahan, Executive Director and Counsel at the Canadian Environmental Law Association. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Walkerton's Drinking Water Protection Legacy. In this series, we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the contamination of Walkerton's water supply by speaking with the people who experienced the tragedy and the inquiry that followed firsthand. With me today is Faye de Leon, who is a paralegal and researcher at CELA. During the Walkerton Inquiry, Faye was researcher and document manager for the legal team on behalf of the concerned Walkerton citizens. The concerned Walkerton citizens participated in both phases of the inquiry, led by Justice Dennis O'Connor. Faye has worked at CELA for over 25 years and holds Masters in Public Health and Bachelor of Science degrees. Welcome, Faye, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Teresa. Nice to be here.
So when you were working with the concerned Walkerton citizens, CELA's expert witnesses, and the CELA lawyers at the Walkerton Inquiry, what was your role?
Well, generally, I worked as a researcher at CELA, but when the Walkerton Inquiry it was initiated, I was put into the role of document management. So any evidence that were coming in, basically to monitor, track them, and produce them for the lawyers, and make sure there was a safe delivery of that material for preparation purposes.
That's great, and I can remember that being a very high pressure, lots of documents, short turnaround. So what was it like logistically to deal with the documentary disclosure and get the necessary information to where it was needed? What did you actually have to do?
Well, that's where the fun begins, actually, because everything was quite new. We were working within, a very long distance between where the lawyers were and where we were located, downtown Toronto. So one of the first, I think, challenges that we faced was trying to make sure we had adequate delivery of the material. So finding the right company to be able to deliver in a period of time that suits the lawyer's needs. So that took a bit of time because we didn't have those contracts in place. The other logistical issue was we didn't know when the material was coming in. So anytime during the day that material would show up. So we had to, create the space and the time to produce it and to, of course, document and record it. So at certain times during those months, we had to bring in additional assistance, for instance, and it wouldn't be a surprise to have production happen throughout the evening as well. Mm-hmm. So there were times where it was long evenings, coming back into the office to do that material and to make sure that material was then sent off. And the other issue was around just supplies, right? Like making sure there was enough supplies in the office to be able to do that work. But we couldn't really count on local printers in the area to be available and to produce that material in a timely way. So those were the real challenges that we faced, and but I think we managed quite well, actually, given the small group that we had in the office.
And of course, those were the days of fax machines and couriers, in addition to printing and driving material, and we didn't have quite the same capacity on our email systems that we do today.
That's right. It was all those CDs that were coming in and making sure that, you could record them in an appropriate way and that didn't get lost. And I tell you, when you think back about it, just accessing that material, even on the CD, was challenging, right? Sometimes it took like seconds, other times it took minutes.
Right.
So you just didn't know if you were getting everything that you needed.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time this material was needed for the inquiry the following day, as I recall.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And so the fax machine was overworked. We actually had to get another printer. And just verifying that the material was received on the other end, if that was the method that we were using, was working, is always challenging, right? Given that you were off-site. Even setting up the technology where you were in Walkerton,
right.
Was a bit of a challenge. But again, I think everybody worked remarkably well and efficient as they can to get that work done.
Mm-hmm. hmm Yeah, that was pretty absolutely invaluable support. So, what are one or two of your recollections about being involved in that inquiry or the subsequent events? What stands out for you?
Well, my first recollection again was the conference. I think the media event that we were holding the day that all of this broke. We all rushed back to the office. That I remember, and I do think, I think right there and then we knew that this was going to be one of the focal areas of work that we needed to do, and that was obviously reflected. The decisions were made to redirect people's work. Those were,
Mm-hmm.
and of course the long nights. And I think one, of course, that stands out really top of mind is the last few days just before your final arguments were being prepared. All of us around the table, and I think it was the middle of late summer, and it was really hot. So just those, logistical challenges of like getting everybody on the same page and making sure that we're working towards the same deadline was interesting. And then subsequent to that, of course, is just waiting for the results, the outcomes of the inquiry itself, and the organization, responding to those recommendations and following through with them.
And did you ever have a chance to visit the community either during the inquiry or afterward?
Absolutely, we did.
Mm-hmm.
I think I drove up with our articling student at the time, Karen Keenan,
Mm-hmm.
and so we stayed for a day, which was, I think, really helpful for me to kind of, put things in context. But also we had the opportunity to visit the community again, like years after when they opened up the center, as well as the I think it was an anniversary a few years afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That was good. We did that. I did that with Sarah Miller, and of course, a long-standing relationships with the community members. Right,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
pretty significant.
Right, and Sarah was our longstanding coordinator and also a researcher for CELA. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think CELA's participation helped the Walkerton citizens?
I think in a very significant way. One, it allowed the citizens groups access to a process they may not have had access to. And certainly our longstanding knowledge in terms of what we would have anticipated as a problem when all the deregulation process happened. I think that's the wealth of knowledge that may not have had, been able to be shared if we hadn't been involved with the community groups there. And certainly moving forward in understanding what this means for their community long term with the recommendations and the implementation of those recommendations were pretty significant. And that's, I think, reflective on the ongoing relationships you have with the community.
Mm-hmm.
And nowhere in Canada can you say the community's probably better knowledge on what they've experienced from that situation moving forward. And it was a fantastic story about it. One of the young kids who had been affected by that tragedy, who's now at medical school, right? That
Mm-hmm.
just over the weekend. So those are
Mm-hmm.
great stories.
Yes, this weekend when we're speaking has been the 20th anniversary of the actual tragedy at Walkerton, and so some of that media spoke to people in the community, including her. So that's amazing to hear about the legacy that people in the community feel they've brought, both to the province and beyond globally in terms of safe water.
Yes.
This interview is one of a short series titled Walkerton's Drinking Water Protection Legacy, curated by CELA, to be housed on the CELA Foundation's environmental history pages. In this series, we focus on the essential lessons learned from one of our significant cases, the Walkerton Inquiry, and how to ensure drinking water protection and environmental protection is safeguarded into the future. Faye de Leon is a researcher and was assisting with document management during the inquiry. Faye, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you.